Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're taking a completely impartial look at the compounding strategic, tactical, and logistical errors that have severely degraded Russia's military effectiveness throughout 2026. We're basing all of this on recent military and open-source analysis, so let's just jump right in.
To really understand the modern battlefield, we have to start with a pretty fundamental question. How exactly do failures in one area just bleed directly into another? Honestly, how does a massive military superpower, one with literal decades of preparation, begin systematically losing its own war?
12. According to defense reports, this staggering figure actually represents the estimated number of Russian strike aircraft shot down by their own air defenses. Yeah, friendly fire. It really sets a high-stakes tone for the whole cascade of systemic errors we're exploring today.
So, here is our breakdown for today. 1. Friendly fire failures. 2. The Great Fuel Crisis. 3. Wasting armor and elites. 4. The communications breakdown. And finally, 5. Missing the drone revolution. All right, Section 1. Friendly fire failures.
Let's look at the operational challenges in the sky. There's this recent incident that perfectly illustrates the sheer chaos over Crimea. So picture this. A Russian Su-30 SM jet is responding to a massive swarm of 61 Ukrainian drones, but then it catches fire and crashes. Why? Because it was actually engaged by friendly fire. When your air defense system is working so frantically that it accidentally downs your own multi-million-dollar asset, well, that definitely signals a massive breakdown in command.
And the wild part is it's not just one isolated jet. We're looking at a continuous, documented pattern of catastrophic friendly fire. We're talking 12 strike aircraft, 6 helicopters, and get this, over 200 accidentally dropped bombs on friendly territory since 2024. Over 200! In one highly publicized incident back in June 2026, an air defense missile veered wildly off course and actually hit a Russian fuel tank. Analysts think this was likely due to faulty domestic microchips that were hastily brought in to replace sanctioned Western parts.
So the absolutely crucial concept to grasp here is something called airspace deconfliction. Think of it as a delicate ballet. It's the intense coordination required to safely operate your own aircraft within your own air defense envelope, without getting shot down by your own guys. But under the stress of saturation drone attacks, that coordination is failing. And that inability to manage airspace deconfliction has essentially turned Russia's prized Cold War era defensive systems into a major liability.
Moving on to Section 2, the Great Fuel Crisis. Let's trace how this escalated from the skies to the ground. It started out with localized strikes back in August 2025 on refineries in Ryazan and Volgograd. Fast forward to June 2026, and things had spiraled into a full-blown state of emergency. Crimea actually banned civilian fuel sales entirely. And by July, an unbelievable 50 million people were facing severe fuel restrictions. To put that into perspective, that's roughly 35% of the entire Russian population, dealing with cars lining up for blocks just to get gas.
Now, consider the sheer scale of this damage. The Ukrainian General Staff estimated that over 42% of Russian oil refining capacity was disabled. 42%! This forced Moscow completely into a corner. It got so bad they actually had to pass decrees lowering their production standards down to Euro 3 gasoline, literally just to keep their military and their economy moving.
In a rather ironic twist of fate, the systematic destruction of these gasoline logistics facilities is essentially, involuntarily turning Russia into a green energy state. And incredibly, this destruction was sometimes inadvertently aided by their own side. Yeah, open-source intelligence from pro-war bloggers would actually leak locations, directly leading to targeted strikes on their own incoming fuel depots. You really can't make this stuff up.
Okay, Section 3, wasting armor and elites. So, without reliable fuel or safe logistics, the ripple effects hit the ground hard. The stark contrast in tactics here is pretty wild. It shows a complete abandonment of massive mechanized breakthroughs. Old Soviet doctrine always planned for these massive columns of hundreds of tanks just punching through enemy lines. But the 2026 battlefield reality? We're seeing desperate, localized infantry assaults using civilian motorcycles and, literally, golf carts. And why? Just to try and evade these deadly drone corridors that can now easily wipe out entire armored columns.
And compounding that massive loss of equipment is an absolute waste of human capital. Highly trained elite units like the VDV Airborne Forces, troops specifically designed for complex sabotage and rapid deployment,
are being ground down in basic, brutal trench warfare. Naval infantry are conducting costly frontal assaults. This massive tactical mismatch is bleeding the military of irreplaceable institutional knowledge, and it's severely depleting their ranks of experienced officers.
Which brings us to Section 4, the communications breakdown.
If you're wondering how they coordinate these chaotic ground assaults, well, it's a mess. In a cascading series of self-inflicted disruptions, the Kremlin effectively blinded its own frontline troops. First off, their illicit access to Starlink was completely cut off. Then, in an attempt to control domestic dissent, Russian regulators banned Discord and heavily throttled Telegram bandwidth. But here's the catch. The military was heavily relying on Discord to transmit live drone feeds back to headquarters, and troops were actively using Telegram to coordinate their artillery fire.
So, what was the fallout? This massive communications blackout forced Russian troops to rely on giant, highly visible roof antennas just to get a signal, alongside unencrypted, off-the-shelf civilian walkie-talkies. We're talking Amazon-level gear here. This directly enabled Ukrainian forces to exploit these huge blind spots. It actually led to rapid, 10-kilometer advances simply because Russian commanders literally could not communicate with their own forward units.
And finally, Section 5, Missing the Drone Revolution.
Ultimately, all of these tactical and logistical failures point back to one massive systemic blunder. Despite pouring billions of dollars into heavy Cold War-style systems like tanks and heavy aviation and keeping a really rigid, centralized command structure, military planners completely failed to invest in cheap, mid-range strike drones. You know, the exact same drones that now completely dictate the pace of modern combat. Just to give you an idea, Ukrainian drones actually drove 90% of their battlefield strikes in 2026.
It's honestly the classic monkey's paw scenario. Russia spent decades wishing for and heavily investing in this ultimate massive tank army, only to wake up and realize that giant armored columns are completely obsolete against small, decentralized squads wielding cheap, first-person view drones. The army they built simply wasn't the army they needed for this specific war.
This created a huge innovation bottleneck because they relied way too heavily on sanctioned Western components. Rather than actually scaling up their own domestic microelectronics, they totally lost their early electronic warfare superiority. And to make matters worse, their own electronic warfare systems began creating mutual interference with their own communications. They essentially brought a giant, centralized heavy metal knife to a highly nimble drone fight.
So, as we wrap up this explainer, we really have to ask ourselves a bigger question. Looking at this incredible cascade of errors in 2026, everything from friendly fire in the skies down to digital blackouts in the trenches, can a rigid traditional military superpower ever truly adapt the decentralized, lightning-fast reality of modern warfare? Or is the era of the massive armored army just gone for good? It's something to think about. Thanks for joining us for this explainer.